Welcome or welcome back. I decided that in between the time I make my regular videos, I still need something to fill the time with. That way, you get constant content, and I get to work on the more important videos. After all, why not do some reaction videos? I can use either the content I feel the need to reply to, or from subscriber or donor submissions. I'll use the one I can think of a way to make into more big picture videos. So why not respond to an atheist video with plenty of misconception released yesterday at the time of this script writing? Welcome to Creating Understanding Episode 1. It's easy to be an atheist when you don't understand anything. This is Professor Planck. To describe him without showing you anything he said or did would be bloviating and poisoning the well, so I'll keep it for the end of the video. Then you'll have seen that I base my description in something that I already showed about him. Oh, and me responding to him is entirely coincidental. I saw at least a dozen atheists with a similar style, both of videos and arguments, some even worse than him. But his I found today. Today being Sunday, even if I'll upload this video on Friday. So let's get started.
Today we're hearing again from Redeemed Zoomer.
Redeemed Zoomer is a Protestant religious channel, since he himself doesn't want to be known as an apologist channel. He himself admits that he's not all that good at that. I do, however, need to make an addendum here before I address anything serious. In the interest of fairness, I had to insert this addendum here by the suggestion of an atheist friend of the channel. There are two types of atheists. Atheists with an A, so capitalized atheists, and atheists with an A, so uncapitalized atheists. If you're the more intuitive type, Planck is a capitalized atheist, like undeniably. It doesn't even compare. If the type of responses and approaches he makes are not appealing to you, or if after hearing my explanations you are disappointed that there are atheists who make those kinds of responses, you're probably an uncapitalized atheist. This would also be a good time to mention that the type of atheist which I meant in the title screen, the type of atheist who doesn't understand anything, is the capitalist type of atheist. If you want the one-sentence description, capitalized atheists are those who respond to Christianity, and by extension any other theist belief, with zero interest in understanding it. It's a good summary that they address Christians for the purpose of having less Christians. Oh, and besides being one, I highlight Christians because this video is in English. Statistically speaking, the vast majority of atheists consuming and responding to religious content exclusively in English come out of and against Christianity. Oops, that might have technically been 4 sentences. Anyway, if you want the detailed explanation, it will be at the end of this episode, so after I'm done responding to Planck.
And since this time he's talking about something from his side of the philosophical aisle, there's hopefully a better chance that he will actually be able to get it right this time around. And he's going to be powering through these in short form with relative surface level explanations of them, so I thought I'd give the scaled down surface level counters for each of them, just to, as I'm wont to do, balance the conversation.
Planck, the fact that after 2 years of making content you still think that presenting a unilateral perspective that you agree with, in contrast to one you disagree with, is balancing the conversation. Yeah, I still can't wrap my head around how you won't understand what balance is.
And generally people don't die for something they know isn't true. Sometimes people give evidence of supernatural things like demonic possessions, where people start speaking in languages they don't know, or near-death experiences where people see things outside their body that they shouldn't have been able to see.
Okay, the first argument in favor of God, evidentialism. And right off the bat, a lot of these are going to be very Christian-centric, much like all of RZ's videos are. Which is all fine and dandy if you're attempting to validate Christianity. But when your title of your video is All Arguments for God Explained in 10 Minutes, instead of All Arguments for Christianity Explained in 10 Minutes, one would think you should generalize your points so that they could be applicable to non-Christian theologies as well.
Not really. First, most arguments when argued about other gods have the same structure, they just use different examples. What he could do is present the arguments which work for Christianity And then if there are qualitatively different arguments like going atop Mount Olympus and talking with Zeus or using X divine magic artifact to get you to see beyond the veil, then those could be also included. But thinking about it, things like that are also experiential arguments and personal experience, which he does describe later on. So I don't see exactly what do you want other than other examples. Second, he specifically says for God, not for any random deity. There's a specific thing he's arguing for. It's not his fault that you have a more loose conception of what God is.
The moral argument is basically, objective morality is only real if God is real, but objective morality is real, so therefore God is real. Question, is cannibalism good or bad? I think it's good. I think it's bad. I think it's good. I think it's bad. Which one of them is correct? Now, I'm assuming you agree with this one. If you don't, please stay away from me. But how do you know that he's actually correct? How do you know that these aren't just different opinions? Our little friend here can only be objectively correct if there's a supreme authority that says cannibalism is bad. And that supreme authority is what we would call God.
I would agree that cannibalism is bad. Subjectively so. Objective morality does not exist. Objective morality cannot exist.
Yes, it does. Morality can only be objective. Otherwise, if morality was subjective, every opinion on morality by any subject would be correct, because it comes from a subject. That's not how value or measurement works. There are several ways to approach this, but objectivity and subjectivity are about receiving things from something which exists outside of you. Things don't exist independently of God and then God periodically assesses them. Things have those properties because God made it possible to have them. You can perceive light because the matter in your eyes has the properties of being able to interact with photons, but they can't perceive neutrinos. Postscriptum. I only gave that example because it's easier to bridge the gap between us if I give examples of things you believe in already. Probably thinking about the fourth dimension would have worked too. It's up to you anyway. And Wait. What the hell am I doing? I nearly completely forgot. Why did I bring it up in the first place? Okay, so think of your hand. To understand the relationship between God and moral properties would be like the relation between you and the position of your hand. The relation that you have, you dictating the position of your hand, is objective, not subjective, because your hand is actually there. Same, God is in connection with moral properties and that of the laws of the universe in a way which he isn't an observer receiving from the outside of him. Him being an observer could make his positions subjective, but that's not how it works. I should mention that during my formulation of this example, I came across the view of occasionalism, and if you're going to research it on your own, I would mention that extreme views of occasionalism, which is pretty similar to this position, are heretical, so I would be careful if I were to research them in your case. Well, you in here being the viewer of the video, not necessarily Planck, because Planck wouldn't care. He's an atheist. Heresy is not really all that important. Well, not important at all. Anyway, next clip.
Yes, you and I may agree that cannibalism is wrong, but I imagine the cannibal would disagree. And your only defense against that moral subjectivity is to declare that the cannibal is wrong. But based on what?
Based on the fact that you would try to stop it. Therefore, you don't believe in subjective morality. You believe you should intervene in the actions of other subjects out of a moral objection you have for their actions. So anytime you root for the police to catch a thief, or you intervene in some guy harassing a woman, or any other such efforts clearly not based in an objection of efficiency or practicality or logic, you are appealing to an objective moral standard. Let's think of something else that's subjective. Imagine you were at an art gallery and someone told you an opinion on the art which you disagree with. Art taste is subjective. Therefore, you wouldn't say, "You're not allowed to do that, I must stop you from having that opinion." Well, you do try to do that when someone is inappropriate with your mother, Therefore, you don't believe those actions violate a subjective standard, but an objective one. And don't tell me it's anything legal, because we both know that if a law about those actions didn't exist, you would still try to stop it.
The cosmological argument is basically that something must have caused everything else. Everything that happens has a cause, and that has a cause, and that has a cause. So where does this go? Does this go on forever? That's not possible. At some point there needs to be a first cause of everything else. There needs to be an unmoved mover, an uncaused causer, an unchanged changer. It needs to be eternal, because if it ever starts or stops existing, that's change, and it can't do that. It needs to be outside the universe, because everything in the universe is caused. It also needs to be all-powerful, because if it can't be moved, but it can move anything else, that means it's all-powerful. And this is what we would call God.
So this is the William Lane Craig version of the cosmological argument, and it largely boils down to a lot of unproven assumptions and small-mindedly assigning aspects of our universe and how things work within it to prior to or outside of the universe.
What? No! It's based on the properties of causes. You seriously need to listen to what he said again more carefully.
Firstly, assuming that any kind of first cause needs to be intelligent or have intentionality, rather than even contemplating the idea of any first cause potentially being completely a natural occurrence, devoid of any intellect or intentionality.
That's not one of the premises you were presented with. Listen to it again.
The cosmological argument is basically that something must have caused everything else. Everything that happens has a cause, and that has a cause, and that has a cause. So where does this go? Does this go on forever? That's not possible. At some point there needs to be a first cause of everything else. There needs to be an unmoved mover, an uncaused causer, an unchanged changer. It needs to be eternal, because if it ever starts or stops existing, that's change, and it can't do that. It needs to be outside the universe, because everything in the universe is caused. It also needs to be all-powerful, because if it can't be moved, but it can move anything else, that means it's all-powerful. And this is what we would call God.
Where does this speak of intentionality? I'll wait, but you won't find any.
Then, insisting on things like the first cause being eternal, without actually knowing what that means.
Oh, it's not like that was already explained to you or anything.
It needs to be eternal, because if it ever starts or stops existing, that's change, and it can't do that.
Moving on.
It gives the impression of something existing infinitely into the past and future. But time itself does not stretch infinitely into the past or future.
Now you've got to be playing dumb on purpose. That's your assumption, not what you were presented with. Time can be finite. Something eternal just needs to not be affected by it.
This line of thinking also insists on the first cause being outside of the universe, thereby assuming that there is such a thing as outside of the universe in the first place, a notion that has not been established.
No, it's a conclusion based on the properties of causes and the universe, as he says here.
It needs to be outside the universe, because everything in the universe is caused.
So that's that.
Then, the craziest one of all, insisting on the first cause being all-powerful because, it can't be moved? But when did we prove that?
You arrived at the idea of God in his example by him being a first cause, right? Well, by this first cause being a cause, you know that it causes things. It has effects on other things. And by it being the first cause which caused everything else, and that everything that exists can be tracked back to, we know it can have any kind of effect in the world. By the fact that it's the first cause, we know that other things did not affect it, or they would have contributed to causing it. Therefore, yes, we know a priori, by the very fact it's the first cause, that it's omnipotent. This is really basic, man. Stop playing dumb. Please tell me you don't get this because you're playing dumb. It would be tragic if it were sincere.
It can move anything and everything else? But when did we prove that? I mean, even if it moved the first thing and started the Big Bang, that doesn't mean that it has all power over everything that occurred thereafter. I mean, I can make a first move by pushing a large boulder that is teetering on the edge of a mountain, and then it moves absolute tons of shit as it careens down the mountainside, that doesn't mean that I have all power over all the trees that it knocked down or the creatures that it killed along its path.
Obviously, you are doing a category error though. Both you and the things you have causes on are contingent. In the cosmological argument, the label God falls on what we reach the conclusion that is necessary, not contingent. Pay some attention, please.
Basically, starting off a chain of events does not insist that the first movement in that chain has all-encompassing power over everything that happens along that chain.
In your example, the entities taking part in the chain of events already existed when you started your observation. That is not the case in the cosmological argument. When you pushed that rock and an avalanche started, the rock and the mountain already existed. So did the laws according to which they operate. That is not the case with God causing things. He brought those things in existence and commanded the laws by which they function. Finding an analogy is pretty difficult. Even a computer programmer with a game is not close enough, since the computer and math existed already. Maybe a closer analogy would be something like a firebender and the fire he wields. He is all-powerful with respect to that fire, though it still has some imperfections, since they rely on the energy inside them. Anyway, God did that with the whole universe.
I don't get it. Okay, let's make it even harder then. Everything is a mixture of act, meaning what it is, and potency, meaning what it could be. For example, a baby actually is alive, and it could be an adult. An apple actually is red, and it has the potency to be eaten. So if you eat an apple, you're actualizing its potency to be eaten. But you also are a mixture of act and potency. For example, you have the potency to be strong, but you're not. Anytime something changes you, it's actualizing a potency in you. Anytime a change happens, you have one thing actualizing another, but you can't go back forever, so eventually you need to go back to an unactualized actualizer, which we call God.
So, all that about everything being a combination of observed reality and the possibilities of what it could be, all that's fine. But the problem occurs when you trail that chain back to your first cause and then assume that it can't have been a similar mixture of reality and possibilities.
No, man. If what you call first cause was also a mixture, then that by itself proves you did not reach the first cause, because it does not have the properties of the first cause. You not understanding the example is not a weakness of the example. You can probably tell that this is the point where I decided on the title of the episode.
For instance, you use the example of a person having the potential of being strong, if they choose to take the steps towards building their muscles and getting stronger. That choice and the actions that were taken restricted the potential and actualized the reality of that person being strong.
Yeah, you restated the example you were given. He knows. He's the one who told it to you.
Well, isn't the same true of God?
No. Watch the video again. This time, paying attention.
Didn't God have the potential to be a deity who created a whole universe and life in order to have a relationship with that life that it created?
No, because that would imply it being temporal, which it was already established that wouldn't happen.
So between these two possibilities, which one do you want to bet on? This one gives you a much better chance, so it's better for you to believe in God.
I'll skip everything else related to the Pascal's wager because he doesn't understand the wager. It's not meant to prove anything, it's meant to make you take theism seriously. Oh, but I will note one thing. One very underhanded tactic.
So let's say you start off with the same basic setup as Pascal's wager. Let's say there's a 50-50 chance that God exists and that God doesn't exist. I don't think that's anywhere close to the actual odds of both options, but fine, I'll give you that one. Well, if it turns out that God does exist, now you have to figure out which God exists. Using the same logic of equal odds for all options, then we have to divide the God exists side into all of the different possible gods that could exist. And that's somewhere in the vicinity of 4,500 gods that humans have believed in and worshipped since we created theism in the first place.
No, you are being deliberately manipulative. You don't divide the God side into various flavors of God. You divide the whole action space. So if 9,000 God possibilities are on the table, then atheism and the initial denomination of God proposed both go down from 1 in 2 to 1 in 9,001. You're just using an underhanded tactic to make atheism more plausible.
This lowers your odds to having selected right to about 1 in 9,000, since you only had a 50% chance of being right about any God existing in the first place. My odds of being right that no God exists is still 1 in 2.
No, adding 9,000 pantheons just means there are 9,000 ways in which atheism could be wrong, and no amount of, but I don't want to apply my standard consistently, will change that. Now that you've already seen some of his arguments, time for that description I skipped at the beginning of the video. He appeared at some point in my timeline, and none of his videos ever surprised or impressed me. You've already seen how he's misunderstanding arguments to a level nearly fulfilling the reverse Hanlon's razor. On top of the occasion, he's deliberately dishonest. I'm honestly glad that I stopped at such an example of dishonesty. He's one of those people who, by the way he thinks and argues, keeps atheism in the least thoughtful, most self-congratulatory mode possible, seeking zero challenge to his own beliefs and just asserting that the non-theist interpretation is better out of something I can't tell if is based on more than pure hubris. Now, a little update for those who watched my regular content. These videos I'm trying to make with the least amount of effort and editing possible just to fill the gaps in between my important series, because those take me a lot more time to record and edit. This video is about 20 minutes long and it took me my free time during 2 days, one of which was in the weekend. If you want to make things easy for me and find something I could respond to, preferably something with really bad takes, DM me or tag me on Twitter. You can use the hashtag creatingunderstanding, which is rarely used, or even mass creating understanding, which returns 0 results, and I will be checking occasionally. If you want to make my job really easy, give me 2 or 3 timestamps of some really bad takes. I prefer to stay in my lane about this, and you'll figure out in time what is my lane, depending on how deep I respond to this or that, but I'd say I'm fairly good with thought experiments. If there's something you're good at and I'm not, I'm also not against talking to you about what's wrong about a thing, adding my own spin, and making a response like that. Finally, I mentioned at the beginning of the video that I'll make the distinction between capitalized atheists and uncapitalized atheists at the end of this episode. Something you'll take note of on my channel is that when I talk about an episode, I talk about the whole of the idea I began covering in a video. And most of the times, I will be describing my own videos as episodes when I'm not done with a topic in one video. In the case of this video, for example, I'm about a third of the way in my script, and I plan to make maybe 4 videos out of this, seeing a few of his videos unrelated to the one I'm responding to right now. This means I have placeholder content for 2, maybe 3 more weeks by the time of the upload of this video. In the meantime, I have bi-daily community posts and I'm trying to get them at an average of 10 likes for a week to start making high community engagement posts. They're really not worth posting if no one will have opinions on them. This series doesn't have a motto yet since it was so spontaneous, so best I can say, since this is C creating you understanding, is that I see you. Have a nice week.